The document was called Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary, and it had been filed with the Galactic Conclave's administrative registry on a Thursday morning under the category of Ecological Management Protocols. Nobody read it for 11 days. This was not unusual. The Conclave's administrative registry received approximately 4,000 filings per standard week from member states, covering everything from trade route adjustments to planetary terraforming notifications to the kind of bureaucratic housekeeping that spacefaring civilizations generated in quantities that no body of reasonable size could meaningfully review in real time. The registry existed primarily as a legal record, a way of establishing that things had been officially documented, not as an active monitoring system. The filing came from the Tharric Supremacy, which had been conducting what it described in the directive's opening section as a habitat remediation operation on a planet designated Keth Secondary. A small world in a system, the Supremacy had formally annexed 18 months earlier, following what it characterized as a voluntary integration agreement with the planet's indigenous population. The indigenous population was a species called the Velesi. They numbered approximately 240,000 at the time of integration, distributed across 17 settlement clusters on a planet whose ecosystem they had inhabited for an estimated 4,000 years. They were pre-spaceflight, had no formal conclave membership, and possessed no military capacity of any kind. Their technology level suggested they were approximately 3 centuries from developing interstellar travel on their own trajectory. Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary described, in 11 pages of precise administrative language, a program to address what it called an incompatibility between Velesi settlement patterns and the Supremacy's planned industrial development of Keth Secondary's mineral resources. The program involved the relocation of Velesi population clusters to a designated zone occupying approximately 4% of the planet's habitable surface, the application of what the directive called atmospheric optimization protocols to the areas outside the designated zone, and a management timeline of 18 months. The directive used the word relocation 14 times. It used the word optimization 9 times. It did not use the word extermination at all. Dr. Amara Osei, xenolinguist at the University of Nairobi's Galactic Affairs Institute and younger sister of the xenobiologist, who had been retrieved from Survey World 7 the previous year, had developed a professional habit of reading conclave administrative filings that most of her colleagues considered eccentric and time-consuming. She had developed the habit because of a conversation she had with her sister Yara during the debrief following the Survey World 7 incident, in which Yara had observed that the most dangerous things in the galaxy were often not the things that announced themselves loudly, but the things that filed paperwork and waited for no one to notice. Amara had taken this observation seriously in the way she took most things her sister said seriously, which was completely and immediately, and had since spent a portion of every working week reading conclave administrative filings with the particular attention of someone who understood that language was not neutral and that the words chosen to describe an action were themselves a form of action. She found Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary on a Wednesday evening, 11 days after it was filed. While working through a backlog of Tharric Supremacy submissions that had accumulated during a conference she had attended the previous week, she read it once quickly to understand what it said. She read it again slowly to understand what it meant. Then she sat very still for approximately 4 minutes, which was unusual for her, before opening a secure channel to Director Okafor's office. "Walk me through what you found," Okafor said, when the channel connected. It was late evening in Lagos, where Okafor maintained her primary office, and she had been reviewing the week's intelligence summary when the call came through. "Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary," Amara said. "Filed 11 days ago under Ecological Management Protocols. I'll send you the document, but I want to explain what it actually says before you read the Tharric's version of what it says." "Go ahead." The Velesi are a pre-spaceflight species on a planet the Tharric annexed 18 months ago, 240,000 people. The directive describes relocating them to 4% of their planet's habitable surface and then applying atmospheric optimization to the rest. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Define atmospheric optimization in this context. That's the question I spent 4 minutes sitting with, Amara said. The Tharric used the term in 2 other filed directives I found in the registry. In both cases, atmosphere optimization refers to the introduction of industrial processing agents that alter a planet's chemical composition to facilitate mineral extraction. In both prior cases, the areas optimized were uninhabited. And in this case? In this case, the areas to be optimized contain 17 Velesi settlement clusters, representing approximately 226,000 people. The designated zone where the Velesi are being relocated has a carrying capacity, based on the surface area and the ecosystem data the Tharric filed as part of their annexation survey, of approximately 14,000. The silence on Okafor's end lasted longer this time. They're not relocating them, Okafor said. The document says they are, Amara replied, 14 times. But the math says otherwise. If you relocate 240,000 people to a space that can sustain 14,000, and then you apply industrial processing agents to everywhere they used to live, the outcome is not relocation. How long has the operation been running? Amara checked her notes. The directive was filed 11 days ago. The implementation timeline in the document suggests operations began approximately 3 weeks before filing, consistent with the Tharric's standard practice of filing documentation concurrent with, rather than prior to beginning operations. So they've had a 5-week head start. Yes, and nobody at the Conclave flagged this. It was filed under Ecological Management Protocols, Amara said. The category is reviewed quarterly. The next scheduled review is in 11 weeks. Director Okafor briefed President Bello at 0600 the following morning, with General Sharma and Foreign Minister Chen Li present. She had spent the intervening hours verifying Amara's analysis through 3 independent channels, cross-referencing the directive's language against the Tharric's prior use of the same terminology, and building a secondary analysis of the Velesi's situation on the ground using satellite observation data that Earth's Colonial Survey Network had been passively collecting as part of its standard regional mapping operation. The satellite data was the most disturbing part of the briefing. 7 of the 17 Velesi settlement clusters show no current habitation signatures, Okafor said, displaying the satellite overlay on the Council's central screen. 3 weeks ago, our mapping data showed active habitation in all 17. The change is consistent with either rapid evacuation or something else. Something else, Bello said. The atmospheric chemical signatures in those 7 areas are also consistent with the processing agents the Tharric use for mineral extraction preparation, Okafor said. We cannot confirm from satellite data alone what has happened to the population of those 7 clusters. But the combination of absent habitation signatures and present processing agent signatures is not consistent with successful relocation. The room was quiet. How many people were in those 7 clusters? Chen Li asked. Approximately 93,000, Okafor said. Chen Li looked at the satellite overlay for a long moment. We're talking about what has potentially already happened to 93,000 people. Yes, Okafor said. And what is continuing to happen to the remaining 147,000? What's the Conclave's process for this? Sharma asked. Chen Li answered because this was her domain. A member state files a formal complaint citing specific treaty provisions. The complaint goes to a review panel. The panel schedules a hearing. The hearing process, from filing to initial ruling, takes a minimum of 90 days under standard procedures. 90 days, Sharma said. The Tharric's implementation timeline shows the operation completing in approximately 60 days from the filing date, Okafor said, which means 55 days from now. The Council absorbed this arithmetic in silence. We cannot wait for the Conclave process, Bello said. It was not a question. No, Okafor agreed. We cannot. What can we do in 55 days that the Conclave process cannot? Okafor had spent the early morning hours thinking about exactly this question, and her answer reflected a deliberate choice she had made about what kind of problem this was and what kind of solution it therefore required. 2 things, she said. First, we go to the Conclave today, not through the standard complaint process, but through an emergency session request, citing imminent threat to an unrepresented species. That process can be initiated within 24 hours if we have sufficient member state support. I've already made preliminary contact with 7 member states who I believe will co-sponsor the request. And second, we send ships, not a fleet, not a military force, a humanitarian convoy, under Conclave humanitarian charter provisions, carrying food, medical supplies, and portable shelter, with a Colonial Defense Force security attachment sized to protect humanitarian operations. Okafor paused. The humanitarian charter allows member states to conduct relief operations in non-sovereign territory with the charter's authorization. We file for charter authorization simultaneously with the emergency session request. Both processes move on parallel tracks. The Tharric will object to both, Chen-Li said. Loudly, Okafor agreed. And their objection will be part of the emergency session. Every member state will be watching how the Supremacy responds to a humanitarian relief operation and an emergency session request simultaneously. The optics of that objection will do work that our arguments alone cannot. Sharma spoke carefully. The security attachment. How large? Large enough to protect the humanitarian operation from interference, Okafor said. Small enough that it cannot be characterized as a military intervention. She met Sharma's eyes. But General, I want the ships that escort the convoy to be the kind of ships that make the Tharric calculate very carefully before they decide whether to interfere. Sharma nodded slowly. I can do that. The emergency session request was filed within 18 hours, co-sponsored by 9 member states, 3 more than Okafor had initially projected. The humanitarian convoy authorization was filed simultaneously, and both requests were transmitted to every conclave member state with a cover document that Amara Osei had spent the preceding night writing, a plain language translation of Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary that replaced the Tharric's administrative language with descriptions of what the directive's provisions actually meant in practice. The cover document was 4 pages long. It was titled, with the directness that Amara considered the most important editorial decision she had ever made, What This Document Says and What It Means. It circulated through conclave diplomatic channels within 6 hours of transmission. Within 12 hours, it had been forwarded beyond diplomatic channels into general information networks by 3 member states whose governments had read it and decided that their populations should also read it. The Tharric Supremacy's response to the emergency session request arrived 22 hours after the request was filed. It was lengthy, legally sophisticated, and built on 3 arguments. That Keth Secondary was sovereign Tharric territory following the Voluntary Integration Agreement, that Operational Directive 7 Keth Secondary represented a legitimate exercise of domestic resource management authority, and that the emergency session request constituted an unprecedented interference in member state internal affairs that, if granted, would set a dangerous precedent for the conclave's relationship with its member states' sovereign rights. It did not address the mathematical relationship between a designated zone with a carrying capacity of 14,000 and a population of 240,000. It did not address the absent habitation signatures in 7 settlement clusters. It did not address the presence of industrial processing agents in those same areas. Amara read the Tharric response and wrote a second document, 3 pages long, that addressed each of those absences directly. She titled it, What This Response Does Not Say and Why That Matters. The humanitarian convoy departed Earth's outer perimeter 4 days after the emergency session request was filed. 12 vessels in total, 8 carrying supplies and 4 carrying the Colonial Defense Force security attachment that General Sharma had assembled with the specific brief Okafor had given her. Protective, not provocative, but unambiguous about its capacity. Commander Ravi Patel commanded the security attachment from the escort vessel Principled, a name that had been assigned to the ship 3 years earlier, and that Patel had always found slightly earnest, but that now seemed, given the mission, entirely appropriate. He had 4 ships, none of them the largest in Earth's fleet, all of them fitted with the kind of weapon systems that suggested their commanders had thought carefully about the difference between capability and intent. The convoy's route to Keth Secondary took it through a transit corridor that passed within sensor range of a Tharric border station. Patel had expected this. He had prepared for it by ensuring that every vessel in the convoy was broadcasting its humanitarian charter authorization on all standard frequencies, along with the Conclave filing numbers for both the emergency session request and the humanitarian convoy authorization. The Tharric border station hailed them 4 hours into the transit. Convoy. You are approaching Tharric sovereign territory. Unauthorized vessels are not permitted in this sector. Reverse course immediately. Patel had written his response himself, with the same care he applied to tactical planning. Border Station. This is Commander Ravi Patel of the Earth Colonial Defense Force, escorting a humanitarian convoy operating under Conclave Charter Authorization 7 Humanitarian Keth, filed 4 days ago and currently under Conclave review. We are proceeding to Keth Secondary to deliver humanitarian relief to the Velesi population. Our authorization documents have been transmitted on this channel and are available for review. We are not reversing course. The border station did not respond for 11 minutes. When it did, the response was a formal protest notation rather than a physical intercept order, which told Patel several things about what the Tharric had calculated regarding the cost of physically stopping the convoy versus the cost of allowing it to proceed. They proceeded. The emergency session of the Galactic Conclave convened 9 days after the request was filed, the fastest emergency session in the body's recent history, a speed that reflected both the severity of what the member states had read and the particular persuasiveness of Amara's 2 documents, which had by the session date been read by a substantial portion of the galaxy's informed population, rather than just its diplomatic corps. Ambassador Chen Li addressed the session with the document translated into plain language spread across the chamber's central display, visible to every delegate present, and to the broadcast feed carrying the session to 37 species networks. I want to be precise about what we are asking this body to do, Chen Li said. We are not asking the Conclave to adjudicate the validity of the Tharric Supremacy's annexation of Keth Secondary. We are not asking this body to rule on the general question of member states' domestic resource management authority. We are asking this body to look at the mathematical relationship between a carrying capacity of 14,000 and a relocated population of 240,000, and to tell us what word it uses for the outcome of that relationship. The Tharric delegation's lead representative rose to respond. His argument was the same 3-point legal framework the written response had presented, delivered with the confidence of a legal position that had been carefully prepared and that, in its technical merits, was not entirely without substance. Chen Li waited for him to finish, and then said, "The Supremacy's representative has not addressed the 7 settlement clusters. I would like to give him the opportunity to do so now. Specifically, I would like to know where the approximately 93,000 Velesi who inhabited those clusters are, and what the presence of industrial processing agents in those areas indicates about their current condition." The Tharric representative said that the relocation process was ongoing and that detailed population tracking was not immediately available. Chen Li said, 93,000 people's location is not immediately available. The session lasted 11 hours. At the end of it, the Conclave issued an emergency injunction requiring the immediate suspension of all Tharric operations on Keth Secondary, pending a full investigation, authorized Earth's humanitarian convoy to proceed under Conclave protection, and established a joint investigation panel with authority to access Keth Secondary's surface. It was the first time in the Conclave's history that an emergency injunction had been issued against a major member state based on the analysis of a single administrative filing by a single xenolinguist who had been reading registry documents in her spare time. The humanitarian convoy reached Keth Secondary's orbit 6 days after the emergency session, now operating under the additional authority of the Conclave injunction, and accompanied by observers from 4 member states who had joined the convoy at the Conclave station. What Commander Patel's ships found in orbit, and what the convoy's survey teams documented on the surface in the days that followed, was the subject of a report that Okafor read in its entirety in a single sitting, which she had not done with any document in 3 years. The report confirmed that 7 settlement clusters had been eliminated. It confirmed the presence of approximately 91,000 Velesi survivors in and around the designated zone, in conditions that the report described, with the careful precision of people who had been trained to document rather than editorialize, as severely degraded relative to their pre-integration baseline. It confirmed that 6 additional settlement clusters were in the process of being cleared at the time the convoy arrived, and that the arrival of the convoy and the Conclave injunction had interrupted that process. It also found, in the 8th settlement cluster, that the convoy reached approximately 1,400 Velesi who had not yet been moved to the designated zone, and who, upon the arrival of humans bearing food and medicine and a Conclave authorization document, reacted in a way that the convoy's medical officer described in her personal log, not her official report, as the most significant thing she had ever witnessed in her professional life. They had not known anyone was coming. They had not known anyone had noticed. They had been watching what was happening to the other clusters and waiting for their turn with the particular stillness of people who have run out of options and have not yet run out of hope. Hongriler. The Tharric Supremacy's government fell 8 months after the Keth secondary investigation concluded. Not to an external force, but to its own population, which had read Amara's documents and the investigation report and had reached conclusions about their government's actions that proved incompatible with continued electoral support for the individuals responsible. The new government's first act of foreign policy was to formally acknowledge Velesi sovereignty over Keth Secondary and withdraw all Tharric personnel and operations from the planet. Its second act was to establish a reparations fund, the size of which was determined by the Joint Investigation Panel and which the new government paid without legal challenge. The Velesi, who had numbered 240,000 at the time of the Voluntary Integration Agreement, and who numbered approximately 161,000 when the convoy arrived, began the process of returning to their settlement clusters in the months after the Tharric withdrawal, with assistance from a joint human conclave reconstruction team that spent 2 years helping them rebuild infrastructure that had been destroyed. Amara Osei visited Keth Secondary 14 months after the convoy's initial arrival, as part of a linguistic documentation team working to record the Velesi language and oral history tradition, which the elders of the surviving clusters had identified as their most urgent preservation priority. She spent 3 weeks in the 8th cluster, the one whose inhabitants had been found still waiting, learning enough of the Velesi language to hold a basic conversation and recording hours of oral history that she would spend the next 2 years translating and publishing. On her last evening there, the cluster's eldest historian, a woman whose age Amara estimated at somewhere between 80 and 120, asked her through the interpreter they shared how Amara had come to read the document that had started everything. Amara thought about how to explain it. She thought about her sister Yara and the conversation they had had after the Survey World 7 incident, and the observation that the most dangerous things were often the ones that filed paperwork and waited for no one to notice. "Someone told me," Amara said finally, "that the most important things are sometimes written in language designed to make sure no one understands them. I decided it was worth learning to read that language." The historian was quiet for a moment, through the interpreter. "In our tradition," she said, "we have a word for someone who reads what is hidden and speaks what is true. It is the oldest word in our language for a kind of person we have always needed and rarely found." She said the word in Velesi, and Amara recorded it, and later, when she was translating the oral history archives, she spent a long time with that word, turning it over in her mind, trying to find something in any human language that carried the same weight. She never found an exact equivalent. She translated it, in the end, as witness, though she noted in her translation commentary that the Velesi word carried dimensions the English did not, suggesting not just someone who sees but someone who sees, and therefore cannot remain silent, for whom the act of witnessing and the obligation to speak are not two things but one. She thought that was, in the end, a reasonable description of what her sister had taught her, and of what she had tried to do with a document that 11 days of silence had nearly made permanent.